Hey everyone, my name is Preston and I am Kira's husband. You've probably seen a lot of photos of me on social media. As I was talking to her, I heard that there were a lot of people in the education community that were interested in the video side of things. And as someone who first dabbled a little bit in photography and then jumped into videography kind of head first, I just began to think about all the really easily avoidable mistakes that I made early on that I wish that someone would have just sat down and explained to me right off the bat. And so that's what this piece is for. I'm just going to take a little bit of time to walk through 5 easily avoidable mistakes that you should be aware of as a beginner videographer. One of the very first questions that you might have is, what frame rate should I be shooting my video in? When you pick up your DSLR camera and you switch it into video mode, you're probably going to notice that hidden in the settings somewhere, there's going to be an option for you to pick a frame rate. You're going to see numbers like 23.97 and 24 and 29.97 and 60 and 59 and 120, and the list goes on and on and on. And it can be really hard to know what the heck is the difference between 23.97 and 24? Like, what should I pick? If you're anything like me starting out, you probably see a big number and you're like, oh, that must be the best. So you just pick the highest number on your camera and you start recording. But there actually is some intentionality to that. If you've watched any tutorials or read anything, you've probably seen or heard videographers reference FPS, or frames per second. And that frame rate is what that is referring to. So when you hear something like 24 FPS, what that means is there are literally 24 still images per second of video that are being pushed together to create that image, to create that video. The same goes for if it is 60 frames per second. That means that there are literally 60 still images being represented in every second of video footage that you shoot. Now, why does that matter, and which one should you choose? As a beginner videographer, I'm going to recommend that there are 2 frame rates that you should stick to. One is either 23.97 or 24, which for a lot of reasons that I won't go into right now, you may see both options available on your camera. Or the other option is 60 frames per second. Now, deciding between these two depends on the tone that you want to set with your video footage and the delivery method and the playback that you intend for it. So here's what I mean by that. If you choose 24 frames per second, the reason why 24 is a number, it's not just an arbitrary number, is that the human eye is able to detect up to 24 frames in a second. It's what we see in real life. So anything over that is going to be pushing more data into that 1 second of video footage than what the human eye is actually capable of noticing. That said, when you play back 24 frame per second footage, which is exactly what I'm shooting right now, it's going to feel most like you're sitting in the room with someone. It's going to feel most as if you were right with someone watching something in real time. That means that a 24 frames per second frame rate is really important for things like interviews, things like speeches at a wedding, anything that you intend to play back in real time. Now that said, let's say you want to capture something really buttery, really smooth, and you know that you want to slow that footage down in post. If you take that 24 frames per second footage and you slow it by 50%, what you're going to end up with is a product that looks very, very choppy, because the human eye is already capable of noticing those 24 frames per second, and you've just slowed down so you're able to focus in as a human on those changes more deliberately. That said, if you take something that's shot in 60 frames per second and you slow it down by half, what you're going to get is a product that results in a very smooth, very buttery, slow motion kind of feel that really lends itself to a cinematic approach to videography. So determine your tone and then pick the frame rate that's going to best suit that tone. Easily avoidable mistake number 2. You've set your frame rate and you get your gear, you grab your camera, you've got your talent that you want to shoot, and you go outside because you know that you're going to have naturally better lighting situation. Maybe you don't have a lot of studio lighting, you just want to capture that natural light. So you put your camera out and you set it down to an f2 aperture because as a photographer you love that really shallow depth of field. And you crank your ISO down and you still realize that your video image is blown out. And so what do you naturally do as a photographer? You naturally would just crank that shutter speed up to compensate, to bring that exposure triangle into balance. But in video, you can't do that. And here's what I want you to memorize. Your shutter speed should always be double your frame rate. So if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should always be set to 1/50. And if you're shooting in 60 frames per second, your shutter speed should always be set to 1/120. Now, how do you correctly expose if that's the case? Because if you set that and you lock those parameters, what you're going to find is that you're not able to crank your ISO down low enough to get a properly exposed image. This is where ND filters come into play. So let's say that you're out on a trail and you're walking your dog and you decide that you want to shoot some footage, but you can tell that the snow is really bright and it's reflecting really bright and it's really hard to expose that image. With an ND filter on the front of your lens, what you're able to do is you can control the amount of light that comes in without distorting the image or changing the color. Now this is invaluable for videographers because it allows you to maintain that really shallow depth of field that comes from a really fast wide open aperture. But it also means that you don't have to crank your shutter speed up and create distortion in the image. So some of my favorite NDs, and I should just tell you, I think this is one of the most valuable tools that you can purchase as a videographer early on. I'm not gonna lie, it's an investment. You should plan to spend about $100 or $200 or more. In fact, there are some NDs that are as much as $1,000, not that I'm recommending those. But I do think it is an important resource to consider purchasing early on because it will really up-level the quality of your footage. Some of my favorites are made by Hoya. Another one is the Polar Pro Peter McKinnon Variable ND. And that said, I would really encourage you to pick a variable ND filter. You can find these set to be like just a 2 ND, which means it's dropping it by f2. But I would really recommend finding some sort of a variable ND because that's going to allow you to do this with your footage. One pro tip that you should be aware of is that you should purchase the variable neutral density filter that fits your biggest lens. Buy the biggest one and then go to Amazon. I'll link it in the comments and in the video below, and buy a step-up ring or a kit of step-up rings that will allow you to fit that variable ND filter to all the glass that you own. That's going to save you the hassle and the money of purchasing and investing in multiple NDs early on, but it's also going to allow you to use that on every lens that you own. And that leads us to easily avoidable mistake number 3, which is not lingering in your shot long enough. And if you're anything like me, I'm an introvert, and early on especially, I felt uncomfortable shooting in some situations, and so I would kind of hurry through it. I would get what I needed, but only what I needed. I wouldn't linger in a shot, and what happens is that doesn't give you any breathing room when you get to the edit. On top of that, you never know when you're gonna catch something that you weren't expecting because your camera was rolling. So one of the practices that I've instituted is, especially if it's an event like a wedding or I've done a lot of commencements, different events that I'm helping to storytell, is I'll leave the camera rolling for as long as I can. And yes, that creates more footage, and yes, that creates more time in post. But as you begin to speed up your edit process, it's really not too bad. And what happens is you begin to catch things that you would have missed before. And you begin to have extra footage that allows you to put those just little finesse details on your finished pieces that your clients will absolutely love. Easily avoidable mistake number 4. I'll just fix it in post. This is something that I've heard a ton. There are tons of tutorials out there to show you how to fix the mistakes that you make when you're shooting. And let's be honest, it's going to happen. You're going to make mistakes. And post-production is a powerful tool to help you fix some of those. One of the areas that I think it is critical that you get right, first off, is audio. I've heard it said many times, and I really believe it's true, that bad audio will absolutely ruin beautiful footage. But if you have really great audio, it can actually improve the overall product if the footage isn't so great. So I think if you can nail the audio on site right off the bat, it's going to save you a lot of heartache, and it's going to result in a piece that just looks a lot more polished. Now, in terms of audio, it can be really difficult to know where to begin, especially if you are coming from the photography world, because you probably have never had to think about audio. And if you start to do research, you're going to hear that you need this mic and you need this cable and you need all of these pieces, and it's hard to know what to prioritize when you're trying to decide how to invest that well and hard-earned money. So I wanted to just give you a list of the items that I find crucial. The first of which is that you need to know that the built-in audio on your camera is not good enough. You can't settle for that. I would really recommend that you consider purchasing a shotgun mic. Now, that's actually what I'm using to record the audio in this video right now. In my opinion, I would prioritize a shotgun mic over a wireless lav or any other solutions if you have to pick just one to begin with. And the reason why is because not only will it allow you to do a boom setup, sort of like what I'm doing right now, but it's going to also be a great tool for capturing audio on location. So if you're shooting at an event, you can easily mount that shotgun mic to the top of your camera rig and be able to just run and gun and get good audio. But you're also going to have a great mic for a studio setting, and I think that's invaluable. The other thing that I would really highly recommend is a portable audio recorder. Now, if you do any research on this, there's two major brands kind of in this sphere of audio. One is Tascam and the other is Zoom. Those are both favored brands among videographers. I personally have the Zoom H5 and use the H6 a lot. I've also used Tascams. I think really it's just a matter of what you can get a good deal on. They're both going to do a great job of allowing you to record audio and monitor it while you're on a set. Now, why is this important? A portable audio recorder is going to be critical and crucial for you if you're going to be able to capture the audio coming off of a soundboard at an event. For instance, I've already mentioned, but I do an annual commencement every year, and I'm able to run an XLR cable off of their board and into my unit, and when I walk away from there, I know that I've got the audio that I need to really make that piece professional. Now, in a studio setting, what it's going to do is it's going to allow me to run multiple inputs into that and then even export that out to my camera in real time, and I can monitor their levels and send it to my camera and hard bake that good audio into the video file. I would highly recommend that you purchase one of these. You can even find some that have little audio modules on the top that will allow you to plug a shotgun mic into it or what's called an XY mic into it. If you have any more questions about audio, drop me a comment and I'd be happy to answer that. Speaking of monitoring audio, you're going to need a pair of headphones, and I would really encourage you to find a pair of over-ears. You don't have to spend a ton of money, but just something that will close out the sound and allow you to be able to clearly hear what's coming through your mics. It's amazing how when I got my first pair of over-ears for editing, I was able to clearly hear little pops and hisses and things that I could control if I had just heard it before I got into the post-production stage. So I think a good pair of headphones is going to be a crucial part of you capturing good audio on set ahead of time, and it will save you a lot of heartache later on. One last thing that is not at all equipment related: preparation for audio. One thing that I heard from a speaker at Adobe Summit, and it's just stuck with me ever since, is take time and go to your location 24 hours in advance and just listen and just look and see what activities are happening in the space that you intend to shoot in. Are there air registers right underneath where you want to put your talent? And is it summer in Texas, and so the AC is definitely going to be running and it's going to ruin your audio? These are things that you can prevent if you just are prepared and make a checklist ahead of time and do the grunt work of doing your homework in preparation for a shoot. And it's going to make you so much less stressed when you get there to know the variables going in, to know that you've already planned for them. It's going to allow you to be so much more present with your talent when you're shooting. And I think that it's just an invaluable step of becoming a polished videographer and a polished professional. Last easily avoidable mistake is not being organized in your edit. So you've done all the steps so far and you're ready to start editing. So you plug your memory card into your computer and you go in and you see the footage and it's beautiful and you're super excited and you grab it and you just start dragging it onto a Premiere Pro timeline. But what happens is you've missed some crucial steps that will save you a lot of heartache in the process of editing. Let me introduce you to folders and bins. One of the things that I've implemented is as soon as I have a shoot complete, I take that footage and I copy it onto 2 external hard drives that I don't intend to touch. I then also duplicate that content onto a super fast external SSD. I prefer G-Tech. There's so many out there and they're getting cheaper and cheaper. So I would highly encourage you pick one of those up. And the reason why I do that is because it makes my computer's ability to handle files so much more efficient. Then my next step is to go ahead and jump into the bin structure in the project panel in Premiere. Now this is going to look really similar no matter if you're in Premiere, no matter if you're in Final Cut Pro, or even in something like iMovie. You're going to be able to come in and create folder structures that you can then copy your content that you've just created in the folders on your computer, on your external hard drive. And what that's going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to know exactly where your footage is as you're editing it. Now here's a pro tip too. You can go in and you can color code all of those files so that when they hit your timeline, when you're making edits, you can easily look at your timeline and you can say, I know all the footage that I shot with the bride and groom pre-ceremony is yellow. And I can see that exactly where it is on my timeline, and I know how things are coming together and where to easily find shots. Now that's going to get really important when you start to stack up a lot of video files and things get a lot more convoluted. But if you can learn how to implement some sort of an organizational structure like that early on, it's going to create so much less heartache for you down the line. So these are my top 5 easily avoidable tips. There's in all truth, probably like 100 others that I've thought of, so you can expect more videos like this. But if you found this helpful, let me know in the comments below. If you have any follow-up questions or any other suggestions for future content, don't hesitate to let me know as well, and we'll be in touch. Thanks so much.